Okay, this is Frank from Gettysburg Historic Walking Tours, and today we are going to do a video on the Black Horse Tavern. This is one of the most historic buildings in Gettysburg and maybe the most well-preserved tavern of the town. Now, the Black Horse Tavern, though this current house was built between the year of 1812 and 1813, the property actually goes back much further. A man named William McClellan originally built a tavern here in the 1740s, around 1747. And it was quite popular. It was a wooden building, and during the 1750s, he sold alcohol here at the tavern. Now, one of the things that McClellan didn't do was he did not apply for a liquor license. Now, the reason that this spot was so popular, and as you can hear by the cars going by in the road, this road goes back to 1791, and at the time it was called the Nichols Gap Road. Today it would be 116, and it went to Nichols Gap. Now, Nichols Gap no longer exists today, but the towns of Fairfield and then out to the Gap, heading toward Hagerstown, was the Nichols Gap area. And this was a major interstate for traders to come by on their way eastward toward the Susquehanna Valley. And this was one of their stops. They could stop and get their livestock watered and fed and stay for the night, have a drink. However, in 1753, Mr. McClellan was fined because he did not have a liquor license. Now, his son would later apply for that liquor license, and this would be in the McClellan family, William McClellan, then his son, and then his son. And it would stay that way through the 1800s. Now, in 1809, where you see this bridge today here crossing the creek, there was a stone bridge that was originally there in the year of 1809. Now, in 1843, this farm was sold to a man named Francis Breen. And Francis Breen was one of the wealthiest guys in Cumberland County, if not the wealthiest. He owned well over $30,000 in real estate in Cumberland County. Well, the farm was sold to him, and he had this farm during the Battle of Gettysburg. So this has been part one of the Black Horse Tavern, or Bream's Tavern, here on Gettysburg Historic Walking Tours. Okay, this is going to be part two of the Black Horse Tavern here with historian Frank Patrick Murren Jr. here on Gettysburg Historic Walking Tours. Now, on July 1st, 1863, General Andrew Humphrey of the 2nd Division of the 3rd Corps Army, who was marching with the 3rd Corps, ended up taking a left and ended up coming up this road here, the Black Horse Tavern Road, to the Black Horse Tavern. He was trying to find the Union Army, and when he got here, he was met by Francis Breen, who told him he was in a bit of a bind because he had totally missed the Union Army. The Union Army was in that direction to the northeast, and he was actually now behind Confederate lines. So, of course, Humphreys, knowing this, made an about face and headed back in that direction and would make his way back to find the Union Army. But that was something that happened here on July 1st of 1863. Now, later in the evening, General McLaws' division arrived here late on the 1st, and they made this area their campsite. And that would be very important because this would later be a field hospital for McLaws' division, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Now, on July 2nd, another Confederate general, James Longstreet, would come by this tavern, and this was when his original plan to attack was thwarted, and he had to find a way to get his men on the right of the Confederate line. And he spent several hours on the afternoon of July 2nd, 1803. Excuse the noise here. He spent several hours marching and counter-marching his troops. And we did a great video series a couple of years ago. You want to go back and watch it. It's called Longstreet's Countermarch. It's something that's not mentioned about the Battle of Gettysburg, but it actually delayed his troops. Instead of attacking 11 in the morning, the attacks on July 2nd would not step off until about 4 p.m. That was because he was counter-marching. Now, as his troops came by the tavern here, he decided he had to find a way to get to the Confederate right, and he headed up this road. And just up the road there in the distance, where that line of trees is, the road bends to the left and then goes up to the top of a hill. Now, if you were to walk that direction today and get to the top of that hill, which is also part of this hill that you see, you would then see Little Round Top. So General Longstreet ran into a problem, because when he got to the top of that hill and seeing Little Round Top, he spotted the Union Signal Corps on the top of Little Round Top. Being afraid that the Union Signal Corps would spot him, giving away his position, he then marched back into this direction and continued his counter-march. And if you want to see the route of the counter-march, please go back and watch that video called Longstreet's Counter-March. Also, a man named Colonel John Black seen this tavern, another Confederate. And Black was a non-drinker, and he knew that taverns had whiskey. And one of the things he did was he ordered men under his command to destroy any of the whiskey in this building. And of course, Longstreet asked him if he had saved any of the whiskey for both him and Black, and Black responded that, "You know, sir, I don't drink, and no, I'm afraid I did not." So, of course, I'm sure as Longstreet did those marches there on July 2nd and found out that there was no whiskey here, he could not have been very happy. Now, again, as I said earlier, this also became a field hospital for General McLaws' division under the supervision of Dr. Simon Baruch. Many of the troops that were here were from the 2nd and 8th North Carolina, who got ripped up along the Wheatfield Road on July 2nd. Over 70 Confederate soldiers were buried here and around the Bream House and the Bream Barn, which you see in the distance over here. And there were 222 Confederate wounded in all at this spot here, including one officer who was actually buried in the cemetery that sits behind the house. Now, of course, on July 4th, Lee's army is retreating back down the Fairfield Road, and Ewell's Corps comes up Hers Ridge Road to the Fairfield Road. Now, one of the things that has changed a lot about this area is the road itself. Today, Route 116, as you see that car head east, goes through that little cutout in the gap. But that was not a part of the original road in 1863 that was known as Nichols Gap Road. The road that existed then today would be Bream Hill Road. And in the distance, I've actually parked my Toyota there as a marker. So Ewell's Corps are coming from Hers Ridge Road down this way, and they meet at the Fairfield Road, and then they come in this direction here, right by the barn, to the Black Horse Tavern, and then head west into the Gap and then off into Maryland and Virginia with the rest of General Lee's army and the wagon trains filled with wounded. After the war, Francis Bream would put a claim in for damages to his property in the amount of $7,000. and he was reimbursed zero. He was told by the federal government that the damages, including the destroyed whiskey, were done by the Confederate Army, and that the United States was not responsible for any damages done by the Confederacy. This stayed into Frederick Bream's hands almost to the end of his life. In 1879, he ran it as a tavern, and of course, the following year he passed away. Again, this is a spot, one of the older buildings in the town, one of the best preserved taverns in the town, that goes all the way back to the 1740s and 1750s, and it was used by and passed by both armies on July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863. This has been the Black Horse Tavern here on Gettysburg Historic Walking Tours. Okay, we are here at McClellan Cemetery. It's one of the oldest cemeteries in Gettysburg, and it sits off of the Black Horse Tavern, which you can see here in the different distance, rather. Now, the McClellan Cemetery was the original McClellan family plot. We did say that the McClellans were the ones that started what would later become the Black Horse Tavern, that would be owned by Francis Bream. And in the cemetery are some Revolutionary War soldiers. There's a Confederate officer who was wounded and died at the Battle of Gettysburg. And again, there's a Revolutionary War soldier here. And this cemetery has a lot of unreadable stones that have completely worn away. And again, it sits here just on the north side of the Francis Bream Tavern. This cemetery, of course, was here during the actions here at Gettysburg on July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1863.